Hey everybody, so this will be the first video of the channel. Welcome. This channel focuses pretty much entirely on wargaming, and the first game I'll be playing is Hearts of Iron 3, which is a 4X realism strategy game based on World War II. I'll be playing Germany. This is the 1939 time frame. The game starts in 1936, but I've basically done all the early economy and military buildup prior to the Polish campaign. This is not a tutorial, but I may consider doing one from scratch. As really any major country in the game, you can really play any country that you want, but the scaling with the economy and the way the game is set up with the units and stuff, playing these minor nations is not very fun. So anyway, yeah, we'll be playing Germany. So let me start out by just going through the units that we have and outlining the plan of attack against Poland, which will be commencing on September 1st. And yeah, so let's get started. So we have High Command. Hearts of Iron 3 is really great at showing the chain of command. So this is our theater command, which is modeled off of the German High Command of the Armed Forces, and the theater commanders control everything within their theater. On a global level, you can create multiple theaters, but for Europe as Germany, it's kind of fine to just have one theater. What I have seen people do sometimes is they'll have a Western theater for kind of Germany and France, and then an Eastern theater for Russia, but I think that's kind of overkill because there's no limit to how many army groups you can have in a theater, at least as far as I've figured out. I've played this game all the way through 1945, and I've never had issues with running one theater. And I said this wouldn't be a tutorial, but I guess in the process of showing you guys our setup, I'm going to be going over some basic game mechanics. So we'll start off showing production. So we're dealing right now with 476 industrial capacity. This is kind of a unitless value. The higher the better. We're spending a good amount of it on upgrades. I've been researching a lot of 1939, 1940 spec technologies, which we'll go over in a minute. Reinforcement usually doesn't kick off until you actually start losing men in battle, which kind of makes sense. Supplies, it's usually a good idea to have a pretty significant surplus, because as soon as your divisions start moving, they're going to start consuming a lot of supplies. When divisions are static, there is a supply pull, but it pales in comparison to divisions on the move, which makes sense. Production, you're not really always able to match all of the construction needs that you'd like all at once, because this capacity represents the entire industrial output of your country, and it's pretty hard to spend the entirety on production without pissing off your civilians, because you're not producing consumer goods, without your armies running out of supplies because you're not producing supplies, and then your division's going to close to zero manpower and shattering because they're not being reinforced. So you kind of have to split this out sort of proportionally, and that will vary depending on what you're trying to do in the game. And then Lend-Lease is more if you're playing the US or Russia late game, where you have spare IC to give to your puppets or your allies. I've generally noticed that unless you're playing a multiplayer game, the AI is very bad at using this aid that you give them in a sensical way, so I generally don't use it. So you can see we have trade on the left, and we're mostly trading with the Soviet Union now, but we have trade routes all over the world. When we declare war on Poland, the Allies will attack us and start, blowing up our supply convoys. So what I'll do is, as soon as we attack Poland, I'm going to basically cancel all these trade routes, because we want to maintain our transports and escorts for later in the game. We don't want them all just to be blown up by the UK. And we'll also be losing a lot of our trade routes as a result. So we'll be maintaining trade with the Soviet Union up until we attack them. and pretty much everything else except Continental is going to be cut off by the British blockade. Let's go over our divisions. So we have a couple of standard divisions that we're building at this stage in the war. We have our standard infantry division. Now the game splits infantry regiments into 9,000 men, which is very, very high for a regiment. Usually there's 2 or 3 regiments of infantry per infantry division, so what this really represents is 1 or 2 regiments, or actually really 2 or 3, but for the game's modeling, I guess that was fine for them. And then Black Ice, more than the base Hearts of Iron, you really have one main quote-unquote regiment and then supporting battalions, and these supporting units give modifiers to your main regiment. They're not their own regiments like the base game. So for our standard infantry regiment, for Germany, because Germany has oil considerations, it is a division that uses no fuel. So you can see that right here. The supply use is pretty conservative, and we can modify this later with technologies, and our speed is relatively slow. We have artillery regiments, so infantry, you can see we got 1938 spec infantry. We got, let's move over to brigade attachments so I can show you the individual units. We got an artillery regiment, 7.5 centimeter artillery, and our PaK 36 3.7 centimeter anti-tank guns, and then we have recon cavalry for reconnaissance, and engineers for river and fortress attacks. And not having engineers is really a bad idea. You need to have them. This is one of the most scaling and powerful support units you can have in the entire game. And then Black Ice, unlike the base game, you have attached transport that seemingly doesn't do a whole lot in terms of specs because your horse transports aren't firing guns mostly, but they have a super large impact on the mobility of the unit. And your options for Germany in the start are horse transport, which we'll be using for basically all of our non-armored divisions, light vehicle, which we'll be using for some motorized divisions, although I find that this is kind of a middle ground that isn't really the best choice in a lot of cases. Civilian transport, which we won't really be using except for maybe some garrison divisions, and then German truck transport. So these are Opel Blitz wartime transport trucks that we'll be using for our Panzer and motorized divisions as well. Later on you can get half-track transport, but we're not quite there yet. And then Black Ice also has divisional headquarters, and these don't really do anything in and of themselves, but not having a division HQ in your division prevents combined arms bonuses from happening. So you got your brigades in your division loadout, and then you got your combined arms bonuses. So in our current loadout for infantry division, we have a division HQ right here, and having that division HQ allows us to get fire support assault from our engineer, and battle group transport bonuses that combine to 29% combined arms bonuses for combat. But watch what happens if I take away my division HQ. They're all gone. So that is, it's sort of a roleplay thing, but having a division headquarters is mandatory for all of your divisions. And then finally, you can recruit divisions as, you see this as reserves button. Not clicking that basically means that the division is an active duty division in peacetime. Clicking this button changes really only one important thing. Building a division as a reserve uses less IC cost and manpower cost. When you mobilize for war, your as reserve divisions, which I usually build all of my divisions as, will spawn as partial strength. And that's not really a big deal, because as Germany, you start the war off, or really the game off, as 3-year draft and war economy, and those basically put your divisions to full strength as soon as they spawn. So I don't really see the point of building active duty divisions. Maybe some other nations it makes sense, but Germany, I just start building as reserves. And someone in the comments can tell me if that's stupid. I'm not certainly an expert in this game, although I have been playing it for quite a while. So yeah, I think that's the background on production. This is our current production tree. We're going ahistorical in the sense that, let's move to technology. We're not building capital ships, period. And the decisions to build Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, Tirpitz, and Bismarck I actually canceled because they're a huge IC drain, and I'd rather be building land divisions. That's really Germany's biggest part of the triangle of combat power, right? Your Air Force is probably second, and then your Navy should be last. You don't have the economy to build all three services to full strength at once. So I've basically skipped these battleship. They're called capital in the technology trees, and that doesn't bother me because I'm putting my research time into cruisers, mainly as an escort duty and escorts, and primarily submarines. So I want to make sure that my U-boats as Germany are the most modern they can be, because that's really the striking power of the Kriegsmarine. And then the really main ahistorical kind of the thing that I'm having fun with right now is starting off the war as Germany with carriers, which is definitely different. And Germany doesn't have the technology advancement in carriers prior to 1939, and you can start training from 36, but you really can't get fleet carriers in production to the point where they're going to be built early war as Germany, because you don't really unlock these Clausewitz class fleet carriers until basically already 1939. And I have two in production, but as you can see from the build estimator, both Graf Zeppelin and Peter Strasser won't be available until December of 42, which seems kind of extreme, right? This will change when it gets to 100% IC. But once I have constructed Wooper, Enns, Ack, and Berkel, this gets a little bit into the tutorial side, but we don't have any transport aircraft carrier practical. But once we build those 4 light cruisers, we will. And not light cruisers, light carriers. And once we've built those, the practical will go up, and the build time for these 2 fleet carriers will drop substantially. I'm guessing late 41 time frame, which is fine with me. And then we're building some more destroyers. We're also building another group of light cruisers as escorts. We're building 4 heavy cruisers. These are really going to be our only gun ships really in the game, because I'm not going to build them later on. They don't scale very well. Carriers and light cruisers scale much better. You'll notice that we have 2 submarines under construction, and I really should have more under construction. Actually, I'm sorry, I have 4 under construction. And then the way Black Ice and Hearts of Iron works is when you build a ship like a submarine, Type 7C 41 plus, you can build 2 submarines in parallel, which means side to side, and then you can build those 2 parallel submarines in serial, which means that I'm going to be building 2 submarines at a time with 5 on order for each. So if I start production on those, you'll see that I am building 2 in parallel with 5 in serial for each. So these will just go into production, and they'll just produce one after another until this order is finished. And that's a good way to build fleet units in planes. It's not as important for ground units. From an RP perspective, it's not the greatest, because when you build in serial, every 5th division goes back to 1st Infantry Regiment. So you'll notice that the numbering for each regiment is all messed up. And I don't really care about that, because that's just too much effort. I've just gone through and renamed our divisions. On the division level, I don't really care what the regiments are called. We're also building some oil refineries in Hamburg. That's really important. Fuel is Germany's Achilles heel. If you read into World War II, you'll see that oil, just as it does today, is really the crucial resource. Rare materials in Hearts of Iron is really just everything that's not steel or coal. molybdenum, tungsten, you name it. A lot of ships, planes, and special units in land divisions, you have to have rare materials to build various things. And then we're also building our first motorized corps. We'll be changing the names of these divisions. We're actually changing really the name of everything that's produced except for our naval units. We're building up our air bases because we're going to need them to defend Germany from bomber attack. We're also finishing our last production run of factories in our recently conquered Czechoslovakia. We're building close support air units. So right now our technology level gives us Ju-87 Stukas, which are the famous close attack aircraft for Germany. And I think that's it for production. Technology, we're just in the midst of researching our 1938-1939 spec technologies. Black Ice separates a lot of the technologies into more categories in the base game of Hearts of Iron 3. You can kind of see that right now. I won't go through all of that. I might talk a little bit about it as we play. Our distribution of leadership is, we have 67.33 points. A lot of that's in research. A little bit of it's in espionage. We had been sending a lot of spies to Czechoslovakia and Austria to sort of speed up our annexation of them. But now we're going to put all of our spy priority into Poland. I'm going to prioritize disrupting their national unity. I'll have the second priority being counter-espionage, and I'll have the third priority being military espionage. So that's it for now. You can actually see that there's a German Nazi party in Poland, although it doesn't qualify for any cabinet positions. And then theaters, this is just another way to look at the units that are available to each theater. We only have one, so I very rarely often look at this screen. Statistics is not really that interesting until later. And then strategic warfare overview. I'll go over this once the war starts. And then you can see our resources. We're really good on coal. We're pretty low on metal. This is going to be partially alleviated by conquering Poland. We're doing okay on rare materials. Honestly, I'd rather these be switched, but it's really easier to get steel later than it is to get rare materials later, so I guess that's okay. And then oil. This doesn't look terrible, but this is going to start plummeting when we declare war and move our units, so this is something that is a weak point for us. Our only, and the AI knows this, and especially someone you're playing in multiplayer knows this, our only fuel production territory at all for Germany at the start of the game is Hanover, and it only produces 10. And only because I've upgraded our oil rigs by 2. So this is a weak point, and I've added some anti-aircraft guns, but it'd be pretty easy for a player to strategic bomb Hanover and wreck your oil production. So the sooner we can spread out into Europe and capture oil, some of which we'll get from Hungary by being their ally, and Romania mainly by being their ally. That'll help us stay sustainable on that. And then our goals in Russia will be to capture oil and just eliminate them from the war, obviously. So yeah, let's go into the chain of command, or our order of battle. We have 2 infantry armies in the west, really just infantry divisions, buttoned down. They're not going to be attacking France. They're just intended to hold the line here. Our bordering provinces have a relatively built-up fortress and pillbox infrastructure, which represents the Siegfried Line. There was a decision earlier in the game to add more fortresses to parts of this line, and I've done that. Sort of the second intensity. There was a more intense version of that, but it cost more industrial capacity, and I decided to go against that. But I think the River Rhine and our infantry divisions, most of which I gave generals that have defensive doctrine should be able to hold the French. They're not very aggressive when they really should be. So that'll give us time to wipe out Poland and then move our armies to the west, and then it'll be too late for France. So for the eastern group, we have 3 infantry armies, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and then 1 panzer army, which is still in the process of organizing itself. And then we also have 1 close attack group, which we're going to be building up substantially more prior to attacking France. And then we have 4 bomber groups. So these are composed of Heinkel HE-111Bs. These are early game variants of this bomber, but we'll be upgrading that over time. And then we have 3rd Army attacking kind of the Silesian direction, the Pomeranian direction, and then the 4th Army attacking into the southeast of Poland from Silesia, and then we have our striking force, 1st Panzer Army under von Kleist, with 2 Panzer Corps, 1 under von Manstein, and then 2 under Guderian. And our panzer divisions are in the light panzer division mode right now. I haven't upgraded them to medium armor, so their armored strength is composed primarily of Panzerkampfwagen 1s and 2s if you want to roleplay. These will be more than sufficient for Poland. Poland doesn't really have any tanks. I mean, they have a few, but I generally don't seem to run into them. They have mostly cavalry conscript divisions, which the sea orange division symbol means, and then they have light infantry and regular infantry divisions. And I've noticed that when you attack Poland, a lot of these divisions stick to the frontier and they get surrounded rather than withdrawing into the center of Poland where they probably would do more good, and I think that's historically accurate. We have 1 mountain corps in Slovakia, which is our puppet. This is primarily composed of Austrians. I think prior to Austria being annexed by us, we only had really 1 mountain division in, I guess it was in Bad Reichenau, and then when we annexed Austria, a bunch of their infantry divisions I morphed into Gebirgs or mountain divisions, and those are represented by 2, 3, 4, 5 Gebirgs divisions. And I think I chose generals that were Austrian just for fun, but I'm not 100% sure. And then in East Prussia, which is cut off by the Danzig corridor, we have 5th Army under Heinrici with 2 infantry corps, and these primarily are just holding the border because we don't want the Poles to capture Königsberg. That would be really not great. We would obviously take it back, but I've noticed that if you lose provinces with specialized factories like tank factories, if you lose those to the enemy, these tank factories don't really rebuild very quickly, and we really need these tank factories for our build-up prior to attacking the Soviet Union. So that's really our order of battle. I guess I can go quickly over our Navy. We have 9 U-boat groups, which are really represented by 2 U-boats each. There's really no rhyme or reason to that. I've noticed that if I put 3 to 5 U-boats in a U-boat group, and that U-boat group gets caught by British convoy escorts on unfavorable terms, you end up losing 5 U-boats, whereas if I have them in groups of 2, I only lose 2, and that's more of a sustainable loss, especially early on when you don't have that many U-boats. We're going to be building a lot more than this by the time France is down and we can start basing U-boats out of the Atlantic ports. So let's actually get started on the clock here. Let me just make sure I don't have any important decisions. It looks like I don't. So I'll say okay, and I'm going to get the clock started, and we'll go up to 4 times speed. I generally avoid doing things on 5 times speed. It's just things are moving too fast to really track what's going on, and this game is really not an arcade game. You really do need to track what's going on, especially in combat. Otherwise, you're going to lose control of your divisions, and positioning does matter in this game. So you can see we've upgraded our seaboards to level 4, which doesn't really have a huge impact. It just gives some bonuses to money and resources, I guess, represented by trade. Let's see, what is being produced soonest other than industry stuff? So nothing really imminent. So we're really kind of in the mode that we need to be in prior to attacking Poland. I also didn't show, sorry. We do have one convoy raider. We'll be producing more of these. These are basically converted merchant ships. We have our one surface action group, which is what SAG means, with 6 light cruisers. We'll be attaching a carrier to this. I've noticed that 2 carriers and 6 light cruisers is a really good loadout for a single fleet. Any higher than that, and your admirals start having issues with positioning. If you have too many ships in one fleet, you start getting positioning penalties, which I can go into more later. And then we have our primary striking force for the Baltic, which the Polish Navy is really minor. Our intelligence tells us that they have some torpedo boats, some DDs, and some submarines in their 2 Baltic ports. That won't be a problem. We have 3 pocket battleships, which are really just heavy cruisers with 11-inch guns. These are based off the real ships. So here's Graf Spee, Admiral Scheer, and Deutschland, which was renamed to Lutzow later. And then we have 4 1930. They originally were 1934 spec, but now they're 1938 spec. Type 38 Zersteuers, or destroyers in German. This will be really what we're going to use to blockade the Poles. We're not going to move that out until right before the war starts. Yeah, and that's really it. Like I said, we have some carriers coming in, but they're not going to be available until, honestly, really even after the French campaign is over. So let's start the clock again. We'll just check in on our Panzer divisions and see. Okay, 1st Panzer Corps is at high organization. That's good. 2nd Panzer Corps is 9th and 10th Panzer divisions were just deployed, so they're increasing in org. Alright, Chile broke a trade agreement. Latvia, that happens a lot. It's really not a big deal. I have trade on Automate because it's some people like it. I just don't find it an interesting part of the game. And we end up, as Germany at least, we end up losing most of it as soon as the war starts. So, yeah, there's that. We also have some SS garrison divisions. Really, these end up being sort of the cadre for forming larger SS divisions later in the game. So when these spawn, because they're not really that great. I just use them to garrison places like Prague, but if you get rid of these, it damages the chain of events that leads to Panzer divisions and Panzer Grenadier divisions on the SS side later on. So you don't really want to get rid of them, as sort of not useful as they are. And then you do have the sort of very beginnings of your SS Panzer divisions, although they're really just motorized regiments at this point in the game. And we won't be really using them in the Polish campaign, I don't think, because they don't really have any supporting units yet. This is just an infantry regiment, or really 2 by this number, and some motorcycle recon. They're just not ready for battle, in my opinion, so I'm not going to be committing them yet. I will be committing them to the French campaign. Start the clock again. We'll go up to 5 since there's not a whole lot of important things to do right now. We won't be doing that very much in the game though. Alright, so our security units improved. Police centers are useful for producing later in like Belarus and Ukraine because they do help prevent partisan uprisings. I don't think they're really useful to build this early in the game. We've upgraded our close air support, and we've upgraded our medium bombers. So that gets us to E1 versions of the HE-111 and A2 variants of the Stuka, which I think is the variant that would have been engaged in the Polish campaign. So we're pretty close to being historically accurate on a tech level. D1, that's a pretty early variant of the BF-109. I'm hoping to get to E1 by the time we're fighting France. We haven't put any effort into fighter bombers or heavy bombers. I've done some basic stuff for naval bomber and flying boat. I won't be producing those really at all. I might produce a couple of these when we capture France just for convoy raiding, but it's not a priority. Medium bombers, we already went over that. Light bombers, I don't think light bombers scale very well. They're a little bit cheaper to produce than medium bombers, but not by much. And they lose some pretty important stats. I like to do strategic attack, and light bomber strategic attack pretty much sucks. This number doesn't increase very much as you improve your light bombers. This number under medium bombers increases by quite a bit. And then transport planes, we will be producing a bunch because on the Eastern Front, we don't really have time to sit around and improve Russian infrastructure, roads and bridges. So we're going to be feeding a lot of our divisions, especially our kind of leading motorized and panzer divisions, with airdrop supplies from these Ju-52s. So I'll probably be building those as soon as the Polish campaign stops to start building up a stockpile of these. And looks like we're at 31 plus minutes, so I'll actually leave this video here. The next video will be definitely less commentary. I will go over our plan of attack briefly, and then we'll really just get into the combat, and we'll go over how that works, and how to keep, a lot of videos I don't think do a good job of this, how to keep your chain of command and your order of battle semi-organized when you're in battle. A lot of people kind of just let that go to shit, pardon the French. And I don't think that's a good idea, because there are supply penalties for having corps too far away from armies, and armies too far away from army groups, and etc. So yeah, we'll go over some of that. All right, thanks guys, appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time.